The politicians are not the only people talking about teaching today. The last 10 years has seen the arrival of university teaching as a discipline in and of itself. The scholarship of teaching and learning, or SOTL for short. This is a foundational and still generally accepted definition of the field. The scholarship of teaching is problem posing about an issue of teaching or learning, study of the problem through methods appropriate to the disciplinary epistemologies, applications of results to practice, communications of results, self-reflection, and peer review. The birth of the field is generally dated to 1990, to a Bible salesman from Ohio who grew up to be Jimmy Carter's education commissioner. In 1998, the Carnegie Foundation established the Carnegie Academy for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, the people who crafted that definition. The only significant change since then has been the introduction of the addition of the word learning to the title. In 2004, the field got its first international society. In 2007, its own journal. The Canadian version, the society actually existed earlier, but it got its own journal in 2010. Essentially, SOTL asks questions about how to make teaching more effective and tries to provide answers to those questions, and it publishes those answers. And it's that last step that's most important, the publication of the answers. Teachers who engage in scholarship of teaching and learning take what the scholarly teacher does one step further and go public with their work, making it available to colleagues in a public forum and accessible to peer review. This one step represents a change in practice that can transform casual observations about student learning into scholarly work that frames the questions, systematically gathers and explores evidence, reflects on and refines new ideas, and crafts the results in a form that is suitable for public presentation. That's what defines SOTL. That's what in the mind of its practitioners distinguishes SOTL from what it is that most of the teachers in this room do every day, that is, think about our teaching. It's not casual, it's rigorous, and it publishes its results. For a discipline that defines itself by going public, SOTL is, my humble opinion, so far not very good at it. I have attended its workshops. I've spoken at and been to its conferences at a number of universities in Canada. It's always the same crowd. It's always the same people that come out to these things. SOTL has a very strong evangelical streak to it, what it prefers to call a transformational agenda. It sees itself as bringing light into dark classrooms, showing us the right path. But the success of any evangelical movement is ultimately measured by the number of its converts. And by that measure, SOTL is so far mostly a failure. I think part of the problem that they themselves rail against is us, the potential converts, university faculty. We are insanely busy. We are too busy keeping up with our teaching, our research, and sometimes even our teaching to take on a discipline about teaching. We were trained and we work in a culture that rewards time spent on research more than it does time spent on teaching. And we are not the ignorant savages that evangelism always has imagined as its target audiences. We are absurdly well-educated critical thinkers who do not respond well to dogma and jargon. Part of the problem as well is that if you do wade through the jargon, the insights of SOTL seem mostly just very good common sense. These are D. Fink's 5 Principles of Fine Teaching. This is a standard SOTL text. Good courses challenge students to significant kinds of learning. They use active forms of learning. They have teachers who care about the subject, their students, and about teaching and learning. They have teachers who interact well with students. They have a good system of feedback, assessment, and grading. Is there anybody here who would disagree with any of those? I mean, there are teachers who don't do those things. There are teachers who might want to do those things, but don't know how to do those things. But there's nobody here would say that they don't agree with those things, or that they don't know them already. The main problem with SOTL is none of those things. The main problem with SOTL is that it's not at all sure yet. It might become so, but for now, it's not at all sure what counts as knowledge in its discipline, and therefore uncertain how to build upon its own discoveries. Less politely, there is very little evidence that it actually works. There is at this point a fair bit of evidence to show that teachers who apply SOTL principles and practices in their classrooms feel better about teaching, about their teaching. And there's even a fair bit of evidence to show that students who, when asked, then taught using the methods of SOTL, feel better about their learning. But feeling better about teaching and learning is not necessarily the same thing as actually bettering teaching or learning. There is almost no evidence to show that SOTL actually improves either teaching or learning. One recent study that set out to test the effectiveness of a SOTL experiment found that the most important predictor of final grade percentage was prior grade GPA. I could have told them going in. The main problem here, and perhaps not an insurmountable problem, and perhaps we'll talk about this later today, but the main problem is that for right now, nobody really knows how to measure the effectiveness of teaching. So what we've done instead is we'll say, well, we'll measure learning outcomes instead. We'll measure the product instead of the input. The American public school system provides a massive example of the problem with that method, and that is teachers who teach the test. It's a problem we haven't even thought about while we've been embracing learning outcomes in Canada at universities. At the 2009 conference of the Society for Scholarship in Teaching and Learning, an audience member asked the panel on stage, what kinds of evidence would be adequate to prove that studies of teaching and learning had actually improved learning? Nobody on that stage could answer the question. These are the high priests of SOTL. Nobody could answer the question. The representative from the Carnegie Foundation, Mary Taylor Huber, said in her words, "We are confident that, at the very least, this kind of scholarship has improved the teaching climate at the institutions that have taken it up." That's something. SOTL has no doubt improved the teaching climate, the presence and visibility of teaching at the universities that it's been taken up at. But improving the teaching climate is not the same thing as improving teaching. And on that measure, SOTL's still got a lot of work to do. There is one kind of teaching today that is very, very good, one kind of talk about teaching today that is extremely good at going public, unlike SOTL. And that's her kind of talk. That's Margaret Wente, columnist for the Globe and Mail, somewhat notorious columnist for the Globe and Mail, especially in rooms like this. I'll give you a sample of why. This is from her editorials the last few years. Here's one from an editorial called, "Want to Know Why Professors Don't Teach?" Answer: professors have a very pleasant life. They can make $125,000 a year with a good pension and 6 months off each year to do as they please. Their duties include sharing their research at conferences in Italy or Mexico, whose popularity hasn't waned despite the advent of the internet. This is from "Universities Are Sitting Ducks for Reform." Academic salaries are far higher than most people's and have been rising faster. Professors also have good pensions and job security. According to one 2008 survey, Canadian faculty were the highest paid among 15 countries surveyed. This is from my favorite. It's called "They Hijacked the Humanities, Then My Canoe." You are paying the salaries of these scholars. You are paying for the books they publish, the conferences they hold, and the knowledge they're imparting to your children. You are subsidizing their students' tuition. I leave it to you to decide whether you're getting your money's worth. So Margaret Wente is not entirely an idiot, as my colleagues generally call her, or worse. I have to say that partly because she's a University of Toronto graduate, so I need to defend our own graduates. Her arguments are neither unfounded nor unshared. Last spring, the Washington Post published an op-ed titled, "Do College Professors Work Hard Enough?" And the answer was a resounding no. Though faculty salaries now mirror those of most upper middle class Americans working 40 hours for 50 weeks, they continue to pay for teaching time of 9 to 15 hours per week for 30 weeks, making possible a month-long winter break, a week off in the spring, and a summer vacation from mid-May until September. Oh God, don't I wish. You know, not so long ago, university professors had a fuzzy but enviable public image. We were good people. You know, in the minds of the public, we were somewhere in between Albert Einstein and Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society. That's what they thought university professors were. We are losing that image. We are becoming, in the minds of the public, just another group of overpaid, greedy, grasping professionals up there with lawyers and dentists. Apologies to lawyers and dentists in the room.